I pulled into the gravel parking lot of my construction company just as the Colorado sunrise painted the mountains orange. At 28, I'd built Hoffman Construction from nothing after Dad passed, and arriving early was my ritual. But today, something felt wrong. Gary, my stepfather, stood beside my office door with a stranger holding locksmith tools. My coffee grew cold in my hand as Gary's smug voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Your mother sold me your company, Brad. You're fired." The locksmith began changing my locks, while I stood frozen, watching my entire world crumble. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the concrete. Gary stepped aside as the locksmith worked his movements deliberate and rehearsed. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. "What the hell are you talking about?" I stepped forward, but Gary raised a manila folder like a shield. "All legal and proper, son." His voice dripped with false sympathy. "Helen signed the transfer papers last night. Hoffman Construction belongs to me now." I grabbed the folder, scanning documents that looked official enough to fool anyone. Corporate transfer forms, notarized signatures, state business registry stamps. My mother's signature stared back at me, unmistakably hers. "This is impossible. Mom doesn't have authority to sell my company." Gary chuckled, pulling out his phone to record my reaction. "Actually, she does. 40% ownership, remember? The money she invested when you started this little operation. Well, she transferred her shares to me, giving me controlling interest." My head spun. Mom had invested her inheritance from Dad to help me buy equipment and secure the first contracts. But 40% couldn't give Gary control over my business. "The math doesn't work, Gary. Even with Mom's shares, you don't have majority ownership." Check page 3, genius. I flipped through the documents, finding a power of attorney dated 6 months ago. During Mom's surgery recovery, Gary had been granted broad financial authority over her affairs, including business interests. "She was vulnerable. You manipulated her while she was sick. I protected her investments. Your company was bleeding money, Brad. Helen needed someone responsible managing her assets." The locksmith finished installing new deadbolts. Gary handed me a business card for a storage facility. "Your personal items will be boxed up. You have 24 hours to collect them." I fumbled for my phone, dialing my lawyer friend Danny Rodriguez. Straight to voicemail. Then I called Mom. Same result. Gary climbed into his silver pickup truck, rolling down the window. "Nothing personal, kid. Business is business. You'll understand when you're older." Dust clouds swirled as he drove away, leaving me standing in my own parking lot like a trespasser. My phone buzzed. Danny returning my call. "Brad, what's wrong? You sound panicked." "Gary stole my company. I need you here right now." 20 minutes later, Danny's Honda Civic pulled up. He stepped out wearing yesterday's clothes, obviously roused from sleep. Danny had been my roommate at Colorado State before law school, and despite his rumpled appearance, his legal mind was razor sharp. "Show me everything." We sat on his car hood while he examined the documents. His expression grew increasingly grim. "This looks legitimate, Brad. The power of attorney gives Gary authority over Helen's business interests. If she really does own 40%. But how does that give him control?" Danny flipped to another page I'd missed. Corporate restructuring agreement. Helen apparently voted to dissolve the original partnership and reform as a limited liability company with Gary as managing member. With her 40%, plus this restructuring, he legally owns controlling interest. "That's impossible. I never agreed to restructuring." "According to this, you did. Your signature is right here, dated 2 weeks ago." I stared at the signature line. It looked like my handwriting, but I'd never seen this document before. "That's not my signature, Danny. I never signed anything like this." "Are you absolutely certain?" I'd remember restructuring my own company. Danny photographed the documents with his phone. "We need to file an emergency injunction, but first, I need to verify these filings with the state. If they're fraudulent, we can stop this immediately." My construction crew began arriving for the 7:30 start time. Miguel, my foreman for 3 years, walked over with concern etched across his weathered face. Boss, what's happening? Some guy with keys claimed he owns the company now. I looked at my team of 12 workers who'd trusted me with their livelihoods. How could I explain that everything they'd built alongside me might be gone? There's a legal dispute over ownership. I'm fighting it, but you might want to start looking for other work. Miguel shook his head. We stick with you, Brad. You've been straight with us from day one. Their loyalty made Gary's betrayal cut deeper. These men had families, mortgages, responsibilities. Gary's scheme threatened their security too. Danny closed his phone. The corporate filings are legitimate, Brad. Filed with Colorado Secretary of State at 11:58 last night. Someone paid for expedited processing. This was planned months in advance. Appears that way. We need to examine the power of attorney agreement and determine if Helen was coerced or mentally incompetent when she signed. But right now, legally speaking, Gary owns your company. I watched the locksmith pack his tools, while Gary's accomplice, a woman in a business suit, began photographing equipment and inventory. They were already preparing to liquidate my life's work. What's our next step? Emergency hearing to challenge the validity of these transfers. But Brad, you need to understand something. Even if we prove fraud, recovering your business could take months. Gary can do significant damage in that time. Like what? Sell assets, fire employees, cancel contracts, drain bank accounts. If he's planning to steal your company, he won't wait around for legal challenges. I felt my chest tighten. Everything Dad and I had dreamed about. Everything Mom had invested her future in. Everything these workers depended on was slipping away because I'd trusted the wrong person. Danny gripped my shoulder. We'll fight this, but you need to prepare for the possibility that Gary's already won. Danny followed me to Mom's house in his car, both of us speeding through suburban Denver traffic. The Tudor-style home where I'd grown up sat on Maple Street, its familiar blue shutters and white picket fence now feeling like foreign territory. Gary's silver pickup in the driveway confirmed my worst fears. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, suddenly uncertain of my welcome. Mom opened the door, wearing dark sunglasses despite the cloudy morning. Even through the tinted lenses, I could see her eyes were swollen from crying. Bradley, sweetheart, I didn't expect you so early. We need to talk, Mom, about the business papers you signed. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen where Gary's voice carried apparently on a phone call. Perhaps this isn't the best time. There won't be a better time. Gary stole my company using your signature. Mom stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Danny remained by his car, giving us privacy, while staying within earshot. It's not stolen, honey. It's a business restructuring to protect our investments. Protect from what? The company's profitable. We just landed the City Hall renovation contract. Gary explained that you were taking unnecessary risks, overextending credit, making poor financial decisions. He showed me the numbers, Bradley. Without proper management, we could lose everything. What numbers? Gary doesn't have access to my financial records. Mom pulled folded papers from her cardigan pocket. Bank statements, tax returns, credit reports, all bearing my social security number and business account information. How did Gary get these documents? He's been monitoring our family's financial health since we married. It's responsible planning, honey. I scanned the papers, recognizing legitimate financial data, but presented in misleading ways. Seasonal cash flow fluctuations were labeled as chronic financial instability. Equipment loans were characterized as excessive debt burdens. Normal business expenses appeared categorized as wasteful spending. Mom, these documents are manipulated. Gary's twisting normal business operations to look like problems. He has extensive experience managing companies, Bradley. More than you do. What companies? Gary works part-time at the hardware store. Mom's composure cracked slightly. He managed several businesses before we met. Successful operations. Where when you met him at the grief support group 3 years ago, he was unemployed. That's not true. He explained that he was between ventures researching new opportunities. The front door opened. Gary emerged wearing dress slacks and a polo shirt projecting casual authority. He approached us with the confident stride of someone who'd already won. "Morning, Brad. I hoped we could handle this transition professionally, but you're making it difficult. You forged my signature on restructuring documents. I have witnesses to your signature, son. Miguel Santos and Tom Patterson both observed you signing paperwork 2 weeks ago at the job site. My foreman and my lead electrician. That's impossible. Miguel would never lie about something this serious." Gary produced his phone, playing a video recording. The footage showed me at a construction site signing documents on the tailgate of my truck. Miguel and Tom stood nearby, clearly visible. I don't remember signing those specific papers. Memory can be unreliable under stress. Good thing I documented everything properly. I studied the video more carefully. Something felt wrong about the context, but I couldn't identify what. Mom, you need to understand what Gary's doing. He's systematically taking control of our family's assets. Our assets need professional management, Bradley. I'm 62 years old with limited savings. I can't afford to lose my investment in your company because of poor business decisions. What poor decisions? We're booked solid through next spring. Gary interjected smoothly. Overcommitment leads to project delays, cost overruns, and client dissatisfaction. I'm protecting Helen's retirement security. By stealing her son's business. By ensuring professional management and sustainable growth. Mom removed her sunglasses, revealing bruises around her left eye. Bradley, please don't make this more difficult than necessary. Jesus, Mom. What happened to your face? I fell down the basement stairs yesterday evening. Gary helped me to the hospital. I looked between Mom and Gary. The timing was too convenient. You fell the same night you signed business transfer documents? The fall rattled her judgment, Gary explained. She was confused, disoriented. I had to make quick decisions to protect her interests. While she was injured and confused, you convinced her to sign papers transferring ownership of my company. I guided her through necessary financial decisions while she was unable to think clearly, yes. That's elder abuse, Gary. Exploitation of a vulnerable person. Gary's facade slipped momentarily, revealing something cold and calculating. Careful with your accusations, son. Slander can have serious legal consequences. Mom reached for my hand. Bradley, I'm scared. There are so many financial responsibilities I don't understand anymore. Gary handles everything now. The mortgage, insurance, medical bills, taxes. I couldn't manage alone. You don't have to manage alone. I've been helping with your finances for 3 years. Your help was irregular, honey. Gary provides consistent daily support. By isolating you from friends and family. Gary checked his watch theatrically. I have business meetings to attend. Helen, we'll discuss these matters privately later. The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Mom flinched slightly, confirming my suspicions about the source of her injuries. Mom, you don't have to stay here. Come home with me. We'll sort everything out together. I can't abandon my marriage, Bradley. Gary and I made commitments to each other. What about your commitments to family, to Dad's memory, to the business we built together? Tears streamed down her cheeks. Your father would want me to be practical, not sentimental. Gary placed his hand possessively on Mom's shoulder. Helen's made her decision, Brad. Respect her wishes. I looked at Danny, who'd been listening intently from beside his car. He shook his head slightly, indicating we lacked grounds for immediate intervention. Mom, if you change your mind, call me. Anytime, day or night. She won't be changing her mind, Gary said. Helen understands what's best for everyone. As we walked back to Danny's car, I heard the front door close with finality. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Mom standing alone in the hallway, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Danny started the engine. Your mother's clearly being manipulated, but proving coercion in court requires more evidence than bruises and suspicious timing. What kind of evidence? Documentation of threats, witness testimony, medical records indicating mental incompetence, financial records showing systematic exploitation. Right now, we have suspicions, but no proof. So Gary wins. Gary has the advantage, but this isn't over. Men like him get overconfident and make mistakes. We need to be ready when he does. But as we drove away from my childhood home, I wondered if Mom would survive long enough for Gary to make those mistakes. Danny dropped me at my apartment promising to research emergency legal options, while I tried reaching my business contacts. I'd built Hoffman Construction through personal relationships and word-of-mouth recommendations. If Gary was going to steal my company, I needed to protect those relationships first. My phone rang as I unlocked the apartment door. Mayor Johnson's office. "Brad, this is Patricia from the mayor's administrative team. We need to discuss the City Hall renovation project immediately." My stomach dropped. "What's the problem, Patricia?" "We received a disturbing phone call this morning from someone claiming to be the new owner of your company. He suggested there were financial irregularities in your contract bid and recommended we investigate potential fraud." "That's absolutely false, Patricia. There's a legal dispute over company ownership, but my work and contracts are completely legitimate." The caller provided specific details about your financial situation that concerned us. Cost overruns, missed deadlines, subcontractor payment issues. "None of that is true. You have my work history with the city. 3 projects completed on time and under budget." "I understand your position, Brad, but we need documentation proving the legitimacy of your ownership and financial stability. The city can't risk taxpayer money on uncertain ventures." "What kind of documentation?" "Current business licenses, bonding certificates, liability insurance bank statements, ownership verification from Colorado Secretary of State." "I'll have everything to you by tomorrow morning." "Actually, Brad, the timeline is more urgent. We need these documents by 5 o'clock today, or we'll have to suspend the project pending investigation." After hanging up, I realized Gary's strategy was brilliant and vicious. He wasn't just stealing my company. He was destroying my reputation to prevent me from competing against him. I called 3 other major clients. Similar stories. Anonymous tips about financial problems, ownership disputes, potential fraud. Gary had spent the morning systematically poisoning my professional relationships. At First National Bank, I met with Susan Walsh, the business banking manager who'd approved my equipment loans and helped structure my company's financing. "Brad, I'm so sorry, but we received legal documentation this morning requiring us to freeze your business accounts pending resolution of ownership disputes." Gary filed fraud allegations. The paperwork alleges misappropriation of company funds for personal use, unauthorized equipment purchases, and failure to maintain proper corporate records. Until ownership is clarified, we can't allow access to business accounts. "Susan, you know my financial history. 5 years of steady growth, never a missed payment, transparent record keeping. I believe you, Brad, but bank regulations require us to protect assets during ownership disputes. The freeze is temporary, but it could last weeks or months, depending on legal proceedings." "Weeks or months without access to operating capital will destroy my business." "I understand, and I wish there were alternatives, but my hands are tied." Walking to my truck, I felt Gary's trap closing around me. No access to funds, no equipment, no office clients questioning my legitimacy, employees needing paychecks I couldn't provide. My phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "Boss, need to talk." Gary showed up at the job site making threats. I met Miguel at a coffee shop near the construction site. His usually calm demeanor was shaken. "That man is dangerous, Brad. He came to the site with 2 other guys claiming ownership of all equipment and materials. When I challenged him, he got aggressive." "What kind of threats?" "Said anyone continuing to work for you would be prosecuted for theft of company property. Then he offered jobs to half the crew at higher wages if they quit immediately and joined his operation." "Did anyone take the offer?" "Tommy and Steve seemed interested. They got families, need steady work." "I don't blame them, Miguel. Gary's putting everyone in impossible situations." "There's something else, boss. Gary knew details about our current projects he shouldn't know. Client names, contract amounts, completion dates, material suppliers. Information only someone with access to your files would have. He must have gotten into my office computer system. Worse than that. He knew about the Henderson basement job we haven't even bid on yet. The one Mrs. Henderson mentioned to you at church last Sunday. My blood ran cold. Gary had been monitoring my activities far longer than I'd realized. Probably through Mom. Miguel, I need to ask you about something. Gary claims you witnessed me signing restructuring documents 2 weeks ago. Do you remember anything like that? Miguel's face darkened. I remember you signing change orders for the Peterson kitchen remodel. Gary was there filming with his phone, said he was documenting your professional work for your mother's peace of mind. He recorded me signing change orders, but claimed they were restructuring documents. Must be. You signed maybe 6 or 7 papers that day, but they were all change orders. I read them myself because Peterson was being difficult about the electrical work. Would you testify to that in court? Absolutely. That man tricked you, boss. And he's trying to trick the rest of us too. Back at my apartment, I spent the afternoon researching Gary's background. Social media searches revealed almost nothing prior to 3 years ago, when he'd appeared in Denver. No employment history, no business registrations, no property ownership records. But a deeper internet search using Danny's legal database access yielded disturbing results. A Gerald Brennan had been investigated for elder fraud in Phoenix, Arizona. Same age, similar physical description, but no criminal charges filed. Another Gerald Brennan had been sued in civil court in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for financial exploitation of a widow. The case was settled out of court, with sealed records. A third match appeared in Billings, Montana. Local newspaper article about a widowed business owner who'd lost her hardware store to her new husband's debt schemes. The husband's name was listed as Gary Brennan. I called the newspaper reporter who'd covered the Montana story. Jerry Sullivan, Mountain News Desk. Mr. Sullivan, I'm calling about an article you wrote 2 years ago regarding a hardware store fraud case in Billings. The Patricia Williams story that was heartbreaking. Nice lady lost everything to a con-man husband. Is Patricia Williams still in Billings? Far as I know. Lives in senior housing now. Lost her home along with the business. Could you put me in touch with her? I believe the same man is targeting my family. I'll give her your number, but she doesn't like talking about what happened. Nearly destroyed her faith in people. An hour later, my phone rang. An elderly woman's voice, cautious but kind. This is Patricia Williams. Jerry Sullivan said you might be dealing with Gary Brennan. Yes, ma'am. I believe he's stolen my construction company using the same methods he used on you. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That man is pure evil. Let me tell you what he did here, so you'll know what you're up against. Patricia's story was eerily familiar. Gary had met her at a grief counseling group 6 months after her husband's death. Gradual isolation from friends and family. Financial control under the guise of protection. Legal manipulation using power of attorney documents. A systematic takeover of her hardware business. The worst part, Patricia continued, was how he turned my own children against me. Convinced them I was becoming senile, making poor decisions needed professional management of my affairs. How did he steal your business? Same way he's stealing yours, I imagine. Corporate restructuring while I was supposedly mentally incompetent. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd sold everything and disappeared with the money. Did you ever get justice? Never saw a penny back. Gary vanished one night with cash from the business sale. Police said it was a civil matter, not criminal. My lawyer said pursuing him across state lines would cost more than I could recover. What happened to Gary after he left Billings? Nobody knows. He's probably doing the same thing to someone else by now. After the call, I understood Gary's complete strategy. He was a professional predator who targeted grieving widows, stole their businesses, and moved to new hunting grounds before facing consequences. But Patricia Williams had given me something valuable proof of Gary's criminal pattern. If I could demonstrate he was a serial fraud perpetrator, maybe I could stop him before he destroyed Mom and disappeared with everything we'd built. The question was whether I could gather enough evidence before Gary finished liquidating my life's work. I called Danny immediately after speaking with Patricia Williams. We need to hire a private investigator, and we need to do it tonight. Brad PI services are expensive, and your accounts are frozen. I'll pay with personal funds. This is bigger than my business now. Gary's a serial criminal, and Mom's in danger. Danny recommended Marcus Thompson, a former Denver police detective who specialized in financial crimes. We met at Marcus's office in downtown Denver at 8 that evening. Marcus was a lean man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and methodical mannerisms. He listened without interruption as I explained Gary's scheme and Patricia Williams's parallel experience. Professional con artists follow predictable patterns, Marcus said. If your stepfather has done this before, there'll be evidence. But finding it requires resources and time we might not have. What kind of resources? Interstate database searches, background verification services, financial record analysis, witness interviews. The work isn't cheap, but it's thorough. How much are we talking about? $5,000 for a comprehensive investigation. Results within 72 hours. I wrote the check without hesitation. My personal savings represented 2 years of careful budgeting, but saving Mom and stopping Gary was worth every penny. What do you need from me? Everything you know about Gary's background. Real name, approximate age, physical description, known addresses, vehicle information, social security number if you have it. I provided what little I knew, realizing how successfully Gary had concealed his past from our family. I'll start with criminal background checks and move into financial history, Marcus said. If he's done this before, someone else has investigated him. While Marcus began his research, Danny and I strategized legal countermeasures. Even with proof of Gary's criminal history, we face timing problems, Danny explained. Courts move slowly, but Gary can liquidate assets quickly. What's our fastest option? Emergency restraining order to freeze all business assets pending criminal investigation. But we need probable cause of ongoing criminal activity. Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, forgery. How much more probable cause do we need? Evidence, Brad. Documented proof, not just circumstantial connections. At midnight, Marcus called with preliminary results. Your stepfather's real name is Gerald Francis Brennan, age 54, born in Detroit, Michigan. He's been investigated for fraud in 7 states over the past 15 years. Investigated, but not convicted. Exactly. He's careful to stay within legal gray areas and disappears before cases reach trial. But the pattern is unmistakable. What kind of pattern? Targets recently widowed women with business assets. Establishes trust through support groups or community connections. Gradually isolates victims from family support systems. Gains financial control through marriage or power of attorney agreements. Liquidates assets through shell companies and vanishes. How much money has he stolen? Conservative estimate based on known cases, $3 to $4 million over 15 years. Jesus Christ. Brad, there's something else. Gerald Brennan is already married. What do you mean? Legal marriage to Linda Brennan in Phoenix, Arizona. Never divorced. His marriage to your mother is bigamous and therefore legally invalid. Danny grabbed the phone. Marcus, does that invalidate the power of attorney documents? Potentially, yes. Fraud in the inducement. If Helen Williams believed she was legally married when she signed financial documents, Gary obtained those signatures through deception. Helen Hoffman, I corrected. My mother kept her married name. Actually, Marcus continued, that's another problem. I can't find any legal marriage record between Gerald Brennan and Helen Hoffman in Colorado, or any surrounding state. They had a ceremony at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Religious ceremonies don't constitute legal marriage without proper state documentation. If Gary never filed marriage licenses, then Helen never had a legal marriage to dissolve. The implications hit me immediately. If they're not legally married, Gary has no spousal authority over Mom's finances. Correct, Danny said. The power of attorney might be fraudulent if it was granted based on a false marriage relationship. There's more, Marcus added. Gerald Brennan has outstanding warrants in Arizona and Montana for failure to appear in civil court. He's also under federal investigation for interstate fraud. Federal investigation, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Sarah Mitchell in Denver. I have her contact information. At 1 a.m, Danny and I drove to the all-night diner to plan our next moves. Gary's criminal background was even worse than I'd suspected, but he was also more dangerous than I'd realized. He's probably planning to disappear soon, Danny said. Professional con artists don't stay in one place long after executing major theft. What about Mom? Will he just abandon her? That depends on how much money he can extract first. If he's cleaning out her accounts and liquidating her assets, she becomes a liability once the money's gone. My phone rang. Miguel calling at 1:30 a.m. Boss, you need to know something. That Gary guy was back at the job site tonight with a moving truck. They loaded all the equipment and took it somewhere. All of it. Everything. Compressors, generators, power tools, even the portable office trailer. Site's completely cleaned out. Did you call the police? Tried to, but Gary had paperwork showing legal ownership. Police couldn't stop him. Where did they take the equipment? Storage facility on Industrial Boulevard. Big operation with security gates. After hanging up, I felt Gary's timeline accelerating. Equipment liquidation meant he was preparing for rapid asset conversion and departure. Danny, how quickly can we get an emergency hearing? If Marcus can get us federal backing through Agent Mitchell, maybe tomorrow afternoon. But Brad, you need to prepare for the possibility that Gary's already liquidating everything. What about Mom? If Gary's planning to flee your mother's safety, depends on how much she knows about his criminal activities. The thought chilled me. If Mom became a witness liability, Gary might see her as a problem requiring permanent solution. We need to get her away from him. Not without her cooperation. Adults can't be forced into protective custody unless they're mentally incompetent or in immediate physical danger. She has bruises on her face. From a fall, according to her story. Without different testimony from Helen herself, we can't prove domestic violence. I stared out the diner window at empty streets and realized Gary held all the advantages. Legal documents, asset control, victim cooperation, and a 15-year head start on perfecting his criminal methods. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd targeted a family that wouldn't surrender without fighting back. By morning, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive case file documenting Gary's criminal history. Agent Sarah Mitchell agreed to an emergency meeting at the FBI Denver field office. The federal investigation was more advanced than I'd hoped. Gary was a primary target in a multi-state fraud ring involving elder exploitation and business theft. We've been tracking Gerald Brennan for 2 years, Agent Mitchell explained. Your stepfather is connected to at least 12 major fraud cases, totaling over $6 million in losses. Why hasn't he been arrested? Building federal cases takes time, especially with interstate jurisdiction issues. We needed more evidence to ensure conviction. What kind of evidence? Documentation of ongoing criminal activity, victim testimony, financial records proving systematic fraud. Your case might provide the evidence we need to make arrests. What do you need from me? Cooperation with federal investigation, testimony regarding Gary's methods, access to financial documents showing the fraud process. In exchange for what? Federal protection for your mother, asset recovery assistance, priority prosecution of your case. For the first time in 2 days, I felt hope. Gary might have stolen my business, but he'd also exposed himself to federal prosecution. The question was whether we could stop him before he disappeared with everything our family had worked for. Agent Mitchell's confidence was reassuring, but she explained that federal cases required overwhelming evidence before arrests could be made. Gerald Brennan is extremely careful, she said. His previous victims couldn't provide sufficient proof of criminal intent, versus poor business judgment. We need documentation showing deliberate deception and fraud. What kind of documentation? Recorded conversations, financial records, witness testimony, proof of false identity, or bigamous marriage. Marcus had been busy overnight. His investigation revealed that Gary was already liquidating stolen assets through a shell company called Rocky Mountain Holdings, LLC. The storage facility where your equipment is located belongs to Rocky Mountain Holdings, Marcus explained. It's a paper corporation registered in Delaware with Gary as managing member. So he's selling my equipment to himself? Essentially, yes. Tomorrow morning, there's a public auction scheduled at that storage facility. Your construction equipment is lot number 7. Danny reviewed the auction paperwork. The minimum bid is set artificially low, $50,000 for equipment worth over $200,000. Gary will probably bid against phantom competitors to establish legitimacy. Can't we stop the auction? Not without court orders. We don't have time to obtain, Agent Mitchell said. But we can document the fraud for federal prosecution. While he steals my life's work. Sometimes building criminal cases requires accepting short-term losses for long-term justice. That afternoon, Marcus discovered something crucial. Gary's real wife in Arizona, Linda Brennan, had been trying to locate him for 2 years. She hired her own investigator after Gary emptied their joint bank accounts and disappeared, Marcus said. Linda Brennan has extensive documentation of his fraudulent activities. We arranged a conference call with Linda and her lawyer. Gerald is a monster, Linda said. He destroyed my life systematically over 3 years. Isolated me from family, controlled every aspect of my finances, then vanished with everything. Why didn't you prosecute? I tried, but he was careful to make everything look legal. Corporate restructuring, investment decisions, business partnerships. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd moved all assets offshore and disappeared. How much did he take? $800,000. My inheritance business sale precedes retirement accounts. 25 years of savings gone overnight. Did you ever get any money back? Nothing. The accounts were emptied through a series of complex transfers that made recovery impossible. Linda's lawyer provided copies of financial documents showing Gary's systematic theft methods. The pattern was identical to what he was doing to Mom and me. There's something else you need to know, Linda continued. Gerald is extremely dangerous when cornered. He has a violent history that his victims don't usually discover until it's too late. What kind of violent history? Assault charges in Michigan, restraining orders in Ohio, suspected involvement in an elderly woman's death in Nevada. Death. His victim in Nevada died in an apparent home invasion robbery shortly after she threatened to expose his fraud. Police investigated Gerald, but couldn't prove connection. Agent Mitchell took detailed notes. Linda, would you be willing to testify in federal court about Gerald's methods and criminal history? Absolutely. I've been waiting 2 years for this opportunity. After the call, Agent Mitchell outlined the federal case strategy. With Linda's testimony and your evidence, we can establish a clear pattern of interstate fraud. But we need to catch Gerald in the act of ongoing criminal activity. The auction tomorrow. Selling stolen property through fraudulent documentation would qualify. We'll have agents monitoring the auction. What about protecting my mother? That's more complicated. Adults can't be forced into protective custody without their consent. Even if they're being abused and manipulated. Elder abuse cases require either the victim's cooperation or evidence of immediate physical danger. Danny suggested a different approach. What if we could get Helen to recant her power of attorney authorization? If she admits Gary coerced her signature, the federal case becomes stronger. She won't do it while she's living with him, I said. Then we need to separate them temporarily, Agent Mitchell said. That evening, Marcus developed a plan to document Gary's criminal activities while creating an opportunity to separate him from Mom. Tomorrow morning, Gary will be at the auction selling your equipment. That's our chance to get your mother alone and show her evidence of his criminal history. Will that be enough to convince her? Linda Brennan agreed to speak with Helen directly. Victim-to-victim testimony is often more persuasive than law enforcement explanations. What if Gary returns before we can convince Mom? Federal agents will monitor his location during the auction. We'll have advance warning if he leaves early. The next morning, I sat in Agent Mitchell's unmarked car across from the storage facility, watching Gary orchestrate the auction of my stolen equipment. He wore a business suit and projected confident professionalism, completely convincing in his role as legitimate business owner. Several bidders examined the construction equipment, unaware they were participating in an elaborate fraud scheme. Gary answered their questions knowledgeably, having studied my operation carefully enough to fool potential buyers. He's good at this, Agent Mitchell observed. Professional presentation, detailed knowledge, legitimate-looking documentation. Too good. How many other victims has he practiced on? More than we know about. Con artists like Gerald often operate for decades before getting caught. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Helen is alone at the house. Linda, standing by for call. While Gary sold my equipment to unknowing buyers, Marcus and I met with Mom at her kitchen table. She looked exhausted and frightened, jumping at every small noise. Bradley, you shouldn't be here. Gary will be upset if he finds you. Mom, we need to talk about Gary's background. There are things about him you don't know. I know everything I need to know. He's been good to me. Marcus spread financial documents across the table. Mrs. Hoffman Gary isn't who he claims to be. His real name is Gerald Brennan, and he's wanted by federal authorities for financial fraud. Mom studied the paperwork with growing confusion. This must be a mistake. Gary's never been in any legal trouble. He's been investigated in 7 states for stealing money from widows, the exact same methods he's using with you. I showed her photographs from Marcus's investigation. Gary with Linda Brennan in Arizona. Gary with Patricia Williams in Montana. Gary with other women in other states, all recently widowed, all eventually defrauded. I don't understand. Gary and I are married. These other relationships were before we met. Mom, Gary is still legally married to Linda Brennan. Your marriage ceremony wasn't legally valid. That's impossible. We filed all the proper paperwork. Marcus showed her the marriage license search results. No legal record of marriage between Gerald Brennan and Helen Hoffman in any state. Your ceremony was religious only. Gary never filed legal documentation because he couldn't without committing bigamy. Mom's composure began cracking as the evidence mounted. Marcus dialed Linda Brennan's number. Linda, I'm here with another of Gerald's victims. Would you speak with her? For 20 minutes, Linda described Gary's identical fraud pattern: financial control, social isolation, legal manipulation, asset theft. Mom listened with growing horror as Linda's story mirrored her own experience. He's doing the same things to you that he did to me, Linda concluded. The power of attorney, the business takeover, the threats. Gerald is a professional criminal. After the call, Mom sat silently for several minutes, processing the revelation that her entire relationship was built on lies. But he loves me. He said I reminded him of his deceased wife. Mom, Gary doesn't have a deceased wife. He has a living wife he abandoned after stealing her money. Then why would he marry me? To gain legal access to your finances and Dad's inheritance. The house, the insurance money, the business investment. All targets for theft. Gary researched your financial situation before approaching you at the grief group. Mom's phone rang, Gary's ringtone. She stared at the phone with new understanding of who was really calling. Don't answer it, I said. You don't have to pretend anymore. But where will I live? How will I manage my finances? Gary handles everything. You'll live with me temporarily while we sort everything out legally. And Mom, you're stronger than you think. You managed finances successfully for 30 years before Gary appeared. Marcus's phone buzzed with updates from the auction. Gary just sold your equipment for $62,000. Federal agents documented the entire transaction. Is that enough evidence for arrest? Combined with everything else, yes. Agent Mitchell expects arrest warrants within 24 hours. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. Bradley, I'm so sorry. I believed his lies because I was lonely and scared of being alone. It's not your fault, Mom. Gary is a professional predator who exploits people's grief and vulnerability. Can we get your business back? Maybe. But right now, the priority is getting you somewhere safe before Gary realizes you know the truth. As we packed Mom's essential belongings, I realized Gary had made his fatal mistake. He'd pushed his fraud too far too fast, targeting a family that wouldn't accept defeat quietly. His greed had finally exposed him to federal prosecution, but the question remained whether we could protect Mom from his reaction when he discovered his scheme had been exposed. Agent Mitchell called as we finished packing Mom's clothes. Gary left the auction site 20 minutes ago. He's driving toward your mother's house. How much time do we have? 15 minutes maximum. Is Helen ready to leave? I looked at Mom, who was clutching a photo of Dad with trembling hands. Mom, we have to go now. Gary's coming home. I'm scared, Bradley. What if he finds us? Federal agents are providing protection. You'll be safe. We loaded 2 suitcases into my truck and drove to the extended stay hotel, where Agent Mitchell had arranged secure accommodation. Mom would stay there under federal protection while evidence was compiled for Gary's arrest. At the hotel, Agent Mitchell explained the federal strategy. We have enough evidence to arrest Gerald for interstate fraud, but we want to catch him attempting to flee with stolen assets. That strengthens the case significantly. How long will that take? Our surveillance indicates he's planning departure within 48 hours. Bank records show large cash withdrawals and travel arrangements under false names. What about my business? Can federal authorities recover stolen assets? Asset recovery is possible, but complicated. Gary has moved funds through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. Recovery could take years. Years. Federal prosecution proceeds slowly, Brad. Justice happens, but not quickly. That afternoon, Danny filed emergency motions to freeze Gary's bank accounts and halt any additional asset transfers. We also filed papers to restore Mom's legal authority over her own finances. The bigamous marriage issue helps us, Danny explained. Since Helen never had a valid marriage, Gary gained no spousal rights to her property or finances. What about the power of attorney documents? Fraudulent if obtained through deception about marriage status. We're arguing that Helen's consent was invalidated by Gary's misrepresentation. At 6 that evening, Marcus called with urgent news. Gary's loading a moving truck at the house. Looks like he's accelerating departure plans. What's he taking? Furniture, electronics, boxes of documents. He's also been making calls to private charter flight services. Agent Mitchell mobilized federal surveillance teams. If Gary was planning to flee, they needed to arrest him before he reached an airport. Brad, we need you to help us understand Gary's likely escape routes. Where would he go with stolen money? I don't know his criminal network, but he mentioned business interests in Mexico during family dinners. That matches intelligence from other cases. Gerald has been developing offshore financial relationships in Central America. At 8:30, Gary's silver pickup truck left the house towing a loaded trailer. Federal surveillance teams followed at a distance, while Agent Mitchell coordinated the arrest operation. He's heading toward Denver International Airport, she reported. Private aviation terminal. Are you going to arrest him there? Once we confirm he's attempting to flee with stolen assets, yes. Mom and I watched from the hotel room as federal agents closed their trap. 2 years of investigation were culminating in Gary's capture. At 9:15, Agent Mitchell called with updates. Gerald has checked in at the private terminal for a charter flight to Mexico City. Departure scheduled for 10:30. That's it then. We're moving now. Federal agents are making the arrest. For 20 minutes, we waited anxiously for confirmation. Finally, Agent Mitchell called back. Gerald Brennan is in federal custody, arrested on charges of interstate fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering. What about the stolen money? He had $400,000 in cash, plus overseas account information. This is much larger than just your case. 400,000 from where? Your business accounts your mother's savings, liquidated equipment sales, and funds from previous victims. Gerald was planning a major disappearance. Mom burst into tears of relief and grief. Relief that the nightmare was ending. Grief that she'd been so completely deceived by someone she'd trusted with her heart and her future. What happens now? I asked. Gerald will be arraigned on federal charges within 72 hours. Asset recovery begins immediately. Your cooperation will be essential for prosecution. Will we get our money back? Most of it eventually. Federal authorities recovered cash and account information before Gerald could transfer everything offshore. Danny joined us at the hotel to explain the legal next steps. Gary's arrest changes everything. The fraudulent corporate transfers become evidence in criminal prosecution. We can probably restore ownership of your business within weeks, rather than months. What about criminal charges for what he did to Mom? Elder abuse, fraud, bigamy. Gary's looking at serious federal prison time. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept peacefully, knowing Gary couldn't hurt my family anymore. But the full scope of his criminal enterprise was still being revealed. Agent Mitchell called the next morning with additional discoveries. Gerald's financial records show connections to an organized fraud network, targeting senior citizens across multiple states. Your case broke open a much larger criminal operation. How many victims? Preliminary count suggests over 30 victims, and total theft exceeding $8 million. Jesus. Gerald was a significant player in elder fraud, but he wasn't operating alone. Federal investigation will continue for months. The next afternoon, Gary appeared in federal court for arraignment. Danny and I attended to observe the proceedings. Gary looked smaller and more ordinary without his confident facade. Handcuffed and wearing jail clothing, he appeared as what he really was, a middle-aged criminal who'd finally been caught. The federal prosecutor outlined charges 18 counts of interstate fraud, 12 counts of elder abuse, 4 counts of money laundering, and 3 counts of bigamy. The defendant operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise, targeting vulnerable widows across 7 states, the prosecutor explained. Total victim losses exceed $8 million. Gary's court-appointed lawyer requested bail, but the prosecutor argued successfully that Gary was a flight risk with international connections and access to hidden assets. Defendant was arrested while attempting to flee the country with $400,000 in cash and false identification documents. The judge denied bail. Gary would remain in federal custody pending trial. After court, Agent Mitchell provided updates on asset recovery. We've frozen Gary's offshore accounts and recovered most of the stolen equipment. Your business assets should be restored within 2 weeks. What about Mom's money? Helen's savings were mostly intact. Gary hadn't had time to transfer everything before his arrest. So we won. You survived. Gary will face justice. Your family will recover financially, but the emotional damage will take longer to heal. That evening, Mom and I had dinner at the hotel restaurant. She looked older and more fragile than before Gary's betrayal, but also stronger in some ways. I learned something important, Bradley. Loneliness made me vulnerable to manipulation, but family love made me worth protecting. Gary targeted your vulnerability, but he underestimated your family's determination. Your father would be proud of how you fought for us. Dad would be proud of how you found the courage to leave Gary once you knew the truth. 3 weeks later, federal prosecutors offered Gary a plea agreement, 25 years in prison, in exchange for cooperation in the broader fraud investigation and complete asset forfeiture to victim compensation. Gary accepted the plea, knowing that trial would likely result in life imprisonment. Justice had been served, but the long process of rebuilding our lives was just beginning. 6 months after Gary's arrest, federal prosecutors convicted 3 additional members of his fraud network. The Elder Abuse Organization had operated across 12 states, stealing over $15 million from vulnerable seniors. Gary's cooperation led to the recovery of millions in hidden assets, and prevented countless future victimizations. I stood in the renovated office of Hoffman Construction, reviewing blueprints for our largest contract, yet a municipal complex for Jefferson County. The business had not only survived Gary's theft, but thrived beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Federal asset recovery had restored my equipment, and the publicity surrounding Gary's arrest had actually attracted new clients who appreciated our family's integrity under pressure. Miguel knocked on my doorframe. "Boss, the concrete crew is ready for your final inspection on the library project." "Tell them 5 minutes. I need to finish reviewing these electrical plans." Miguel grinned. "Take your time. Tommy and Steve are working extra hours to make up for joining Gary's operation. They feel terrible about doubting you." Water under the bridge, Miguel. Gary was convincing. I don't blame anyone for being deceived. The library renovation had become our showcase project. When news broke about Gary's criminal enterprise, the head librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had insisted on hiring Hoffman Construction to demonstrate community support for fraud victims. The project led to referrals that kept us booked solid through the following year. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, the small business attorney I'd been dating for 3 months. "Dinner at 7. I have news about the nonprofit foundation." Sarah had approached me after reading newspaper coverage of Gary's arrest. As someone who specialized in business protection law, she'd offered to help establish the foundation I'd envisioned to assist other fraud victims. Our professional relationship had gradually developed into something more personal and meaningful. I drove to the senior living community, where Mom had relocated after Gary's imprisonment. Riverside Manor offered independent living, with optional support services, allowing Mom to maintain autonomy while having assistance available when needed. Mom's apartment was bright and cheerful, decorated with photos of Dad and family memories that Gary had tried to erase. She'd joined the community gardening club and volunteered with the literacy program rebuilding social connections that Gary had systematically destroyed. "Bradley, perfect timing. I just finished baking cookies for the children's reading hour tomorrow." "Chocolate chip. Your father's recipe. I found it in the old recipe box Gary tried to throw away." We sat on her small patio overlooking the community gardens. Mom looked healthier and more confident than she had in years. Counseling had helped her process the trauma of Gary's manipulation, and she'd learned to trust her own judgment again. "I have news about the court proceedings," I said. "Gary's Victims' Compensation Fund was approved. Everyone will receive substantial restitution." "How much?" "You'll get back 90% of what he stole plus interest. The federal government recovered more hidden assets than anyone expected." "What about you?" "The business is stronger than ever. Gary's scheme actually improved our reputation in the construction community." "How is that possible?" "People respect companies that survive adversity with integrity. We've had more referrals in 6 months than in the previous 3 years." Mom smiled with genuine happiness for the first time since Dad's death. "Your father always said honest work speaks for itself." Dad was right about most things. He'd be especially proud of how you protected our family when I couldn't protect myself. That evening, I met Sarah at our favorite restaurant near downtown Denver. She'd spent months developing legal frameworks for the Hoffman Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping small business owners protect themselves from financial predators. The IRS approved our tax-exempt status, she announced over appetizers. "The foundation is officially operational. How much funding do we have to start?" "Initial endowment of $200,000 from your business recovery, plus matching grants from 3 other foundations interested in elder abuse prevention." That's incredible. The best part is the educational component. We're developing workshops for senior centers and small business associations about recognizing and preventing financial fraud. What will those workshops cover? Red flags of romantic fraud, legal protections for business owners, proper power of attorney procedures, and resources for victims who need help. Sarah had become more than a romantic partner. She'd become a true collaborator in transforming Gary's criminal legacy into something positive for other potential victims. There's something else, she continued. Agent Mitchell called today. The FBI wants you to speak at their national conference on elder fraud prevention. Me, I'm not a law enforcement expert. You're a survivor who fought back successfully. Your story demonstrates that victims can recover and predators can be stopped. When is the conference? Next month in Washington. The Bureau will cover all expenses and provide speaking preparation training. After dinner, we walked along the South Platte River Trail, where Denver's skyline reflected in the water. Sarah took my hand as we discussed the Foundation's future plans. I've been thinking about expanding the Foundation's scope, she said, beyond fraud prevention into business recovery assistance. What do you mean? Legal aid for small business owners facing financial manipulation, emergency funding for companies threatened by fraud schemes, advocacy for stronger business protection laws. That's ambitious. Your case proved that individual determination, combined with proper legal support, can overcome sophisticated criminal enterprises. Why not make that support systematically available? The next morning, I visited Mom before heading to the construction site. She was preparing for her weekly volunteer shift at the Community Literacy Program. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you might speak at a national conference. FBI wants me to share our story with law enforcement professionals. That's wonderful, honey. Helping other families avoid what we experienced gives meaning to our suffering. Gary tried to destroy us, but he ended up making us stronger. Evil intentions can't overcome family love and determination. Your father knew that. At the construction site, I watched my crew working on the foundation for a new community center. These men had stayed loyal during our darkest period, and their trust had been rewarded with steady work and fair wages. Tommy approached me during the lunch break. Boss, I want to apologize again for considering Gary's job offer. Tommy, you have a family to support. I understood your position completely. Still feel bad about doubting you. Gary was a professional manipulator. He fooled everyone initially. Won't happen again. We know who we can trust. That afternoon, Agent Mitchell called with final updates about Gary's case. Gerald Brennan was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. With good behavior, he'll serve at least 22 years. 22 years. He's 54 now. He'll be in his 70s before possible release. What about his other victims? Complete restitution for all identified victims. The fraud network assets exceeded $18 million. So everyone gets their money back. Most of it. Gary's cooperation helped us recover funds we never would have found otherwise. Will there be additional prosecutions? The investigation continues. Gary's fraud network was more extensive than originally suspected. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the FBI National Conference on Elder Fraud, looking out at 200 law enforcement professionals from across the country. My name is Brad Hoffman, and I'm here to tell you how my family survived and defeated a professional fraud predator. I told our complete story, Gary's systematic manipulation, the theft of my business, Mom's exploitation, the federal investigation, and our ultimate victory. The audience listened intently, taking notes on investigative techniques and victim support strategies. The most important lesson I learned, I concluded, is that fraud victims aren't helpless if they have family support and proper legal assistance. Predators rely on isolation and intimidation. When victims have advocates who refuse to surrender, even sophisticated criminals can be stopped. During the question period, a detective from Phoenix asked about early warning signs. Gary's manipulation was gradual and subtle, I explained. He isolated my mother from family and friends over months, not weeks. He created financial emergencies that required his intervention. He presented theft as protection and criminal activity as legitimate business. An FBI agent from Miami asked about prevention strategies, education, and documentation. I replied, families need to discuss financial security before crises occur. Seniors need to understand that legitimate helpers don't demand immediate secrecy or isolation from loved ones. After the conference, Agent Mitchell and I had coffee at a cafe near the FBI headquarters. Your presentation was excellent, Brad. Several field offices want you to speak at regional training events. I'm honored, but I'm not sure I have time for extensive travel. Consider it. Your story gives hope to other victims and teaches investigators how families can fight back effectively. Maybe a few events per year. Sarah and I are planning to get married next summer, and the foundation work is expanding rapidly. Sarah Chen seems like an excellent partner for both your personal life and your advocacy work. She's amazing, smart, dedicated, and she understands the importance of protecting vulnerable people from financial predators. Flying home to Denver, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed. Gary's criminal scheme intended to destroy our family and steal our assets had ultimately strengthened our relationships and created opportunities to help thousands of other potential victims. A year after Gary's sentencing, I proposed to Sarah on the construction site, where Hoffman Construction was building a new senior center. The building would house programs designed to educate elderly residents about financial fraud prevention. This seems like the perfect place, I said, dropping to one knee as the sun set over the Denver mountains. Where love defeats predation and families protect each other. Sarah said yes, and 6 months later, we married in a ceremony attended by Mom, Agent Mitchell, Marcus Thompson, Danny Rodriguez, and dozens of friends who'd supported us through the crisis. Mom gave a toast at the reception. Bradley and Sarah represent everything good about fighting evil, with love, courage, and determination. Gary Brennan tried to destroy our family, but he only made us stronger and more committed to protecting others. The Hoffman Foundation now operates in 12 states, providing education, legal assistance, and financial support to fraud victims. We've helped recover over $3 million in stolen assets and prevented countless additional victimizations through education and early intervention programs. Gary remains in federal prison, where he'll spend the rest of his productive life. His criminal network has been completely dismantled, and federal authorities continue using intelligence from his cooperation to pursue other elder fraud organizations. I learned that predators count on victims accepting defeat quietly. They rely on shame, isolation, and hopelessness to protect their criminal enterprises. When families refuse to surrender and fight back with determination, even sophisticated fraud schemes can be defeated. Evil people will always exist, but they can't overcome love, courage, and the refusal to accept injustice. My father taught me that honest work speaks for itself. Gary's crime taught me that honest families who stick together can overcome any challenge. The lesson that matters most when someone tries to destroy what you've built: don't surrender. Fight back with everything you have, protect the people you love, and transform your pain into purpose that helps others avoid similar suffering. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's always possible when good people refuse to accept defeat. Has a family member or loved one ever been targeted by a financial predator? How did you recognize the warning signs, and what steps did you take to protect them? I'd love to hear your stories and advice in the comments below, as sharing experiences helps all of us learn how to better protect our vulnerable family members. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it, subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from learning about fraud prevention. Together, we can build stronger, more protected communities. Thank you for listening to our family's journey from victimization to victory. Remember that no matter how dark things seem, love and determination can overcome even the most sophisticated criminals. Stay strong, protect each other, and never give up fighting for what's right.